Everyone in the city thought Tracy was lucky. A village girl living in a big house, wearing a clean school uniform every morning. But no one saw what happened the moment the gate closed behind Mr. Ben's car. Tracy's journey to the city began with hope sitting quietly in her chest. She held a small bag on her lap as the bus moved faster than any road she had ever seen. Tall buildings rose like giants, and her eyes widened with wonder. Her uncle, Mr. Ben, sat beside her, speaking on his phone, his voice sharp and important. He was a rich man, always busy, always moving. When he finally looked at her, he said she would attend one of the best schools in the city. Tracy smiled so hard her cheeks hurt. In her village, school was a dream often interrupted by farm work and long walks. But Tracy loved learning. Books made her feel powerful. As the bus entered the city, she promised herself she would study harder than anyone. She did not know that the city had its own lessons no book could prepare her for. Mr. Ben's house stood behind a tall gate, painted white and shining in the sun. Tracy had never seen a house so big. The floors were smooth, the chairs soft, the rooms many. Mrs. Ben stood at the door when they arrived. Her smile was thin and quick, like it was borrowed. She looked Tracy up and down, from her sandals to her hair, and said nothing. That first day, Tracy was given a small room near the kitchen. Mrs. Ben spoke clearly. Tracy must wake early, keep the house clean, and never be lazy. Mr. Ben nodded without listening, already checking his watch. Tracy told herself this was fine. She would go to school soon. This was only the beginning. The uniform arrived neatly folded. Tracy touched it like it was made of gold. She tried it on and looked at herself in the mirror. She looked like the future she had always imagined. The next morning, she dressed early and stood ready. Mr. Ben ate quickly, grabbed his keys, and left the house. The moment the gate closed, Mrs. Ben's voice changed. "Take it off," she said. Tracy froze. "You will clean first." Confused, Tracy slowly removed the uniform. That day, the uniform stayed on the bed while Tracy scrubbed floors. Every morning followed the same pattern. Tracy dressed up for school. Mr. Ben saw her, nodded, and left. Mrs. Ben waited. Then the order came. Change. The uniform stayed clean. Tracy cleaned the house instead. Dishes. Floors. Shoes. Silence. Mrs. Ben drove her children to school in a shining car. Tracy watched from the window as the car disappeared. She imagined sitting in a classroom, raising her hand, writing her name on clean paper. By the time the car returned in the afternoon, Tracy's hands hurt, and her uniform was folded again, and used. Tracy tried to ask once. Her voice was soft. "Auntie, when will I start school?" Mrs. Ben did not look at her. She only said, "Soon." The word sounded empty. Days passed. Weeks passed. The city moved fast, but Tracy stayed still. Mr. Ben noticed nothing. He left early and returned tired. When Tracy greeted him, he smiled and asked if she was fine. She said yes. Not because she was fine, but because she did not know how to explain her pain without crying. The house began to feel like it was watching Tracy. The walls heard everything. The floors remembered her footsteps. Every corner knew her secrets. The city outside was loud and alive, but inside the house, there was a heavy quiet. Tracy started teaching herself with old newspapers and discarded notebooks. She practiced writing words on scraps of paper. She counted steps like numbers. She refused to let her mind become as tired as her body. Even as a maid, she remained a student inside. Mrs. Ben watched Tracy closely. Sometimes she smiled. Not a happy smile, but a sharp one. She corrected Tracy often, even when nothing was wrong. A cup slightly off place. A floor already clean. Tracy learned to move softly, to speak less. Yet Mrs. Ben's control was careful. She never acted this way when Mr. Ben was home. When he asked about Tracy's school, Mrs. Ben answered quickly. She is settling in. Mr. Ben trusted her. Tracy watched and learned a new lesson: silence can be forced. One afternoon, Tracy was told to sit in the back of the car as Mrs. Ben picked up her children. Tracy's heart raced. She thought maybe this time she would enter a school. But she stayed in the car while the children laughed and talked about homework. Tracy listened closely. Words. Subjects. Teachers. Everything she loved. When they drove away, she pressed her forehead against the glass. The city moved past her eyes, but she was not part of it. Something began to change inside Tracy. The sadness turned into something stronger. She started paying attention. Times. Movements. Words spoken and words hidden. She noticed how Mr. Ben never stayed long. How Mrs. Ben controlled the house like a shadow. Tracy promised herself something new. She would not cry anymore. She would wait. And when the right moment came, she would speak. Not loudly. Not angrily. But clearly. One morning, Mr. Ben returned briefly after forgetting a file. Tracy stood in her uniform. Mrs. Ben was in the kitchen. Tracy opened her mouth to speak, but Mrs. Ben's eyes met hers from across the room. Tracy closed her mouth. Mr. Ben left again. The house became quiet. Mrs. Ben smiled slowly. The city outside continued its daily rush. Cars passed. People walked. Schools opened their gates. Tracy cleaned the house, but her mind walked freely through classrooms and books. She did not know when or how, but she knew something would change. The uniform still waited. Clean. Silent. Patient. The morning looked like every other morning. Tracy woke early. She ironed her uniform carefully. She dressed up and stood near the dining table as Mr. Ben drank his coffee. Her heart was beating fast, but her face stayed calm. When Mr. Ben stood up to leave, Tracy stepped forward before fear could stop her. "Uncle, please," she said gently. "I have never entered the school." Mr. Ben stopped. The words did not sound like a complaint. They sounded like truth. He looked at her uniform, then at his wife. Mrs. Ben laughed lightly and said Tracy was joking. But Tracy did not smile. She only stood still, her eyes clear and steady. Mr. Ben did not leave that morning. He slowly sat back down. He asked Tracy simple questions. "Where is your classroom? Who is your teacher?" Tracy lowered her eyes and said, "I do not know." The silence in the room felt heavy. Mrs. Ben tried to speak over her, but Mr. Ben raised his hand. He had been busy for too long. He had trusted without looking. Now he was looking. He asked Tracy what she did every day after he left the house. Her answer came like falling stones, slow, honest, impossible to ignore. Without warning, Mr. Ben asked everyone to get into the car. Mrs. Ben looked confused but obeyed. Tracy sat quietly in the back seat. They drove to the school Mr. Ben had paid for months ago. Inside the school office, the truth waited like a document already written. The principal searched the records. There was no Tracy enrolled. The fees had been refunded weeks ago at the request of Mrs. Ben. Mr. Ben's face changed. Not with anger first, but with shock. Back in the car, no one spoke. The city moved around them, unaware that something inside that vehicle had broken. When they reached home, Mr. Ben finally turned to his wife. His voice was no longer rushed or distracted. It was steady. Mrs. Ben tried to explain. She said Tracy belonged in the village. She said the house needed help. She said many things. But none of them could erase the simple truth. She had stolen a child's chance to learn. And now the lie stood fully exposed. Mr. Ben did not shout. He did not insult her. He simply made a decision. Tracy would start school immediately. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. He said he had worked hard to escape poverty, and he would not allow it to grow inside his own house. Mrs. Ben felt her control slipping away. The house that once obeyed her now felt unfamiliar. Tracy watched quietly. She did not feel joy yet. She felt something safer, hope returning carefully, like a bird landing after a storm. Tracy walked through the school gates wearing her uniform for the first true time. The sun felt warmer. The classroom smelled of books and fresh paint. When the teacher called her name during registration, she answered loudly and clearly. She listened with full attention. She wrote notes with steady hands. Every word felt like a seed planted in rich soil. For the first time in the city, Tracy was not cleaning someone else's dream. She was building her own. Months passed. Tracy became one of the best students in her class. Teachers praised her focus. Mr. Ben began coming home earlier. He asked about her homework and truly listened to her answers. The house felt lighter. Mrs. Ben changed slowly. Shame has a quiet way of teaching lessons. She stopped giving harsh orders. She began watching Tracy with something new in her eyes, not control, not anger, but reflection. She had almost buried greatness inside her own home. One afternoon, as Tracy stood outside the gate holding her books, she looked at the tall buildings around her. The city no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a place full of doors. Doors that opened for those who dared to speak. And from that day on, whenever she wore her uniform, it was no longer just cloth and thread. It was proof. Proof that truth, even when whispered, can shake the strongest walls.